All right, well, welcome back. It's Tuesday, and we're working hard to learn how to do an animation that would show the warping of the cages that needs to be done, the bending of the cages, so that they can animate how we actually bend the metal. I did find that there was a possibility of using a simple deform. And I did break this up in the last one. You'll remember I put some points in for deformation. The problem is, of course, while I do want to be able to bend this out, and here I'm using proportional editing. But if I put on proportional editing and I have a kind of smooth fall off, then yeah, I can grab it and do the bending. But that won't animate. That would be a permanent change, and you wouldn't be able to see it in the because this is an edit mode. You wouldn't be able to do that and play it in the tutorial as an animation, because you can't use the timeline down here when you're doing editing. And that add-on that we were looking at, there is an add-on that I found that was working with the previous versions of Blender, and it was known as, if I type in animation here, Animal. So this Animal plugin that comes with Blender, unfortunately doesn't do anything. So I've got it checked. It should be on. And Animal is supposed to enable us to do an animation in Edit. And in version 2.82, it won't. So what do? Well, we're forced to work in object mode, but this is all rigid one box. And I did add a modifier to it, which is called a simple deform. And that simple deform will twist it around, and it can be then animated. And you can do it specifically by targeting an object, and for that you add an empty. And so we could just add this empty. Where did the empty go? Should have been there. Let me look for it. Empty. Empty didn't do anything, unless it's because empty's not turned on. No, empties is turned on here. So there was supposed to be an empty added. Let me try it again. Add empty. Plane axis will be fine. All right, so there's my empty. And if I add my empty to this, and I can scale it down, let me turn on a few screencast keys. Bing. Okay, so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So if I scale down the empty, and I tell this empty that you're going to be the target and it's going to control this mesh, then what I'll do is I'll select the empty, object empty, and then I'm going to do it on the z-axis. And now when I grab it, you see the empty causes that deformation. Now it's doing a little bit too much deformation, isn't it? Angle 45 degrees. So if it was a 0-degree angle, then it would be like that. And then you can change the amount of deformation. But of course, here we should get rid of this again. Let me do simple deform again. And simple deform along the z-axis and the limits. See how you have this ability to move stuff around in there. Once again, the empty is what we'd be using, and then we'd be moving it about. See how the empty moving changes things there. But because it's one big block, it's not moving the way we want it to. So I've got to separate this for sure. I just want to show you, however, that you can do this animation. And let me, again, select the cage. Oops, not that part of the cage. Select this part of the cage, and let me go to a more severe angle. And and show you that we can, let me turn off the see-through business. Okay. And the way that you would do the animation would be you would set a keyframe with I, location, rotation, and scale, and then you'd go up to a number of frames, like 3 seconds in, and move this like wherever you want to move it, and set a keyframe. And now when you played the animation, you get that distorting that you want. So it's as simple as that by setting the keyframes, but that's not exactly what we want to do here. What we're really going to have to do, and let me delete this empty now and get rid of that modifier, which is a little bit annoying because it oh, I used twist. I wanted bend. Bend is much better. All right, sorry about that. Let me add that empty back in again. Empty, plane axis. Yeah, so if you tie it to the empty on the z-axis and you move this over as well, and you do that and you say, well, I want the angle to be not so severe, and you say it's going to be the empty that's going to be the one that you're using, then when you grab the empty, you begin to animate that bending, and you can change the angle of bend, as you can see, as it controls. But it shouldn't really be controlling the entire mesh. So once again, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to get rid of simple deform. Better is to find a way to curve it on two different sides, and for that we're going to have to go into edit, and we're going to have to separate this thing. So how about if I move this cage over, I can always move it back, and having this cage here, if I go to a view that I can recognize here, and let's see if I also go to the 3 views a little better. I got to cut this thing up, right? I got to cut it into 2 halves. And one way to do that is to go into Z wireframe and deselect everything and make sure you're in edit mode. And I'm going to cut this. Can I do it with a knife or maybe a loop cut? I could cut it. This defaults to the middle, so that's not too bad, and I got to do the other side as well. So now I've got these things cut, and then I can go and I can use my bounding box and select 1/2 of this. Of course, if I do that, maybe I need to do another loop cut so I can have 2 halves. I wonder what happens if I grab everything like this and then I go to Alt P, is it? No. Control P, no, not that. P, separate by selection. Now I've got 2 halves. So 2 separate objects now. And having 2 separate objects, this object here and this object here, I do want these to be certainly grouped together, but I also want to parent one to the other. So we can say that this is the child who will follow the parent, and then do Control P and say keep transformation. And now if I move the child, they can separate, but if I move the parent, the child comes with it. Now I should be able to act independently on these. And if I set a modifier to this, and I can try a simple deform, then in the z-axis, you can see it starting to bend there with a 45 degree, and I can set an empty to control that. Move that empty, scale it down, it's too big, move it. Move it down. Let's see what that looks like from above. Yeah. All right, so if that is the object that's doing the deformation of 45 degrees, then this half can be manipulated by that. And when we move that empty around, then we're starting to get somewhere. And there's also this business of the fall off. So the limits, like that limit of 53, and maybe it should be 45. Oh no, that didn't work. Limit. Does 45 work at all? No, it doesn't. Oh, because this isn't 0.1, so 0.45 maybe. Let's see what 0.45 does. Won't even let us. Let's see again. Number lock on 0. Nope, number lock 0.45. Not quite perfect. And what about the other side limit? So a bit of difficulty getting. That's 1 and that's 51. Because then when we move it, oh, it certainly isn't. It's got too many constraints in there. So that's not the way to go about it. Yeah, flipping things around. Oh, because the axis is on the. All right. You've got to pick the axis that you want to do the empty on. But it still is not doing what we really want it to do. If I bring this back to 0 and bring this to 1 and set the empty, yeah, it's not making it. So a simple deform is not the solution here. What we should try, however, is to use the modifier known as the warp, because we're trying to warp something. And we can still use this empty, but we can call this empty the outside warp convex one, and then I can make another empty on the inside. Let me move this one right here, and then I'll duplicate it and bring it inside and make this the inside warp concave. One, and I'm using, oops, not 2, but 1. I'll be doing something for the other side as well, so I want to have the one for the outside and the one for the inside. And then take this piece here and say it should go from the inside warp to the outside warp. That's beginning to work like we want. The strength can go that way. Preserve the volume. I don't know what that does. No, it's not anything. The radius can be bigger. You can see that really bends it out. If we make the strength 0 and the radius big, nothing happens. So we've got to do something with the strength, 0.5. Let's see what that does. That brings it out there, and then the radius. Okay. Interesting. It does bend it. So in a sense, we are getting exactly what we want, but it's moving it too far away. And that we don't want. The fall-off type, maybe this has to go in deeper. Yes. Oh, interesting. That's it. I think we found our solution here, because that is what we wanted to see. So we set, and it's better if you go directly over and try to get it in the middle, but as long as things don't move there, then yeah, when we bring them together, they're one, and then we bring it out and it bends. And that is what we want to show, because that's what we're doing with this. Now, is it also doing the bottom one? Apparently not, because they're not equidistant for the radius. So let's see if we move this down. That straightens it up a bit. Right into the middle, and then this one here. And then when we look at it, it should, when we do a G in Y, move it in the Y, then we start to get bent. I guess you could do more than one to make it work. The radius shouldn't be so big that it messes it up. Preserve the volume. I don't know if that's going to help here. Let's see. No, doesn't do anything. So you don't want to preserve the volume. Don't do that, because now, oh, it's not doing anything right now. What happened? Our radius was too small, maybe. Yeah, well, that's kind of what we want to do. It's just not bending uniformly. And I don't know if that has to do with the size. If we scale, oh, yes. Wow, that is powerful. So scaling these things definitely works. So maybe if we make them a uniform scale, then when we look at it and move it in X, it's not an X, in Y, it straightens out and then it bows out. So there's something to be said for this. It's just that it's a bit too strong in the center as opposed to the top. It's sort of falling off as a field. And that's the fall off type. Maybe if we do a spherical fall off, let's see what that does. Well, no, that's not good. That's not good at all. Okay, so forget the spherical fall off. Not going to work with that. It's warp, sphere, root, smooth, linear, or constant. Linear, maybe. Again, it's stronger. It's stronger at these different sizes. And if I make these big enough, it might have to do something with the size that I make the empty. It's a little bit better. But again, not perfect. But at least we have a good idea now of how we're doing this. And that means we should do this to the other side. And I guess I can copy these, this and this, Shift D and move them, and then rotate them about the Z-axis by 180 degrees. And tell this, because this is now going to say convex 1 outside warp convex, and this is now 2, and then this would be inside warp convex 2. And so if this part here is also made with a warp, then we use from the inside to the outside, and the radius, again, fall off smooth. When this is moved, it's not doing anything yet because the radius, I guess, is not set. So we need to make the radius a bit bigger. Yeah, and then as you move, it'll kind of warp it, but not perfect. Certainly not perfect, but better. Better, better, better. At least we can kind of show the idea, and then we can figure out how to do this better later on, because it is not, it's not that obvious. It seems like be that as it may, I think what's still pretty cool about this is that we can now begin to animate the motion. So for example, if I go now to solid and we now look at the keyframes that we would set, we could say, well, here we are with, that should not happen. Yeah, it's easy. Make them the same size. So we could say that the tank needs to be bent out, and we would hit a keyframe here for this one, and for the convex, that should be moved down a bit. For this convex, we can set a keyframe here, and then when we go up to about 3 seconds in, then we can move this and bend it out like that, and we can take this and bend it out. This is the convex, convex, move it out, and that bows it out. And when we play that animation, of course we have to set the keyframe for that too, and set the keyframe for this. Now it bends. So you can say, yeah, you need to bend out the cage. I don't want people thinking, though, that they need to make a cut in there, because you don't make a cut in there. That is wrong. So we have to move those together. There we go. All right, so we're getting closer to this. And of course, that same procedure has to be applied to this cage as well. And for this cage to work like that, oh, somehow we've lost some bars in there, and I don't know why, because there should be bars. Where did they go? All right, we'll have to find out what happened to those bars. But so far, so good with this. I'm gonna pause. So we're going to have to do the same thing with this. I joined these bars and the other bars so that they're a single block. And I'm going to move this back to here and do the same thing of cutting it. So I'll go to Edit, and I have to do a loop cut and slide, and cut this in the middle, 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 and cut this in the middle. It's really convenient that it already picks the middle of each of these, so I don't have to do too much in the way of modification. And having done that, then, and come back to tweak, I can then select with my bounding box. And of course, don't do what I just did. Go to wireframe before you do that. You won't be able to select the stuff that you can't see. So you can either do that side like that, or I actually prefer for this to select that side, and then go Control P. No, not Control P. Sorry, Escape. Just P, and then separate by selection. And now this bottom cage horizontal. Let's go back to the object mode. This one is horizontal half-1, and then we have horizontal half-2, and we can do the same thing with this. We created some empties for it, and add empty. I wonder what'll happen if we use I don't know, maybe we can use a circle. I'm going to try that as the empty, and see what that does. Might as well have fun with it, right? Make that an empty, and then try the other one, or to duplicate it to make the outside. And call this one, hit the period key to find it. We'll call this circle, or we called the other one empty. Oh, we called it inside warp concave 1, and that has the same name as the others, so it's inside. I guess we should call these all empty so that we know. Empty circle. And this one here we can call empty circle outside warp convex 1. And let's just see how these work. So if I select this half and I add that modifier, which was the warp modifier, and I tell it's going to go from the inside to the outside, and that it's going to be smooth, and the radius is going to be like that. What happens when we move this out? Nothing. Nothing, nothing. What happens when we move that out? Nothing. Why? Because there's absolutely no radius, or is it because of the strength? No, it's not the strength. Let's make the strength 1 for the time being. Let's increase the radius. 1.3. Well, it's definitely bowed it out. If you move that forward and you move this backward, well, again, we're getting a kind of strength, but it's not wholly based on the circle. Maybe it's on that point on the circle. And we're facing that same problem of a non-uniform bend. If I scale the circle up, that doesn't help. Scale it down. So, I mean, it does show deformation for sure, but not even deformation. And increasing the radius doesn't necessarily make it work that much better. And if inverse square, maybe inverse square. You gotta play with things. You've definitely got to play with things. So look at that from the top, and a bit of perspective. Bringing this in Y, yeah, the inverse square. That seems to be better. Of course, it should be moved over in X a little bit, so it's steadier. There we go. And then when we move this, inverse square does a much better job of bowing out. I like that. I wonder if that will apply. Well, first let's get our things on the other side. So Shift-D, move it over, and rotate on the Z-axis by 180. And then we have number 2. And here, number 2. And take this side now, add that modifier, the warp modifier, from concave 2 to convex 2, and the radius that we had on this one was 1.5, so let's make this 1.5, and use, instead of smooth, inverse square, and yeah, that's not terrible. It's not getting the very bottom cage rung, and I don't know if that's because we need to move this down in Z. It just doesn't pick up the strength for that. And if we scale it up a little bit, no. So still stuff to learn here, but definitely a much better result that will work for the animation that we want to. So the only thing is, let's see now if we change this to inverse square, does that improve things? So go from linear to inverse square and try and move this. Yeah, it's a little better. It's a little better. Same thing with this size then. Not smooth, but inverse square. And then it doesn't do the bottom cage well, but it does do those top ones. So we have some things to learn here. but we're definitely in the ballpark. And I do want these to travel with my cages wherever I move them. So I'm going to, of course, make these the child, make this the child of, let me see if it's the child, it can move independently, but it moves with the parent. So we're going to make this the child of this, oops, with Control P. And then we're going to make this the child of this. And we're going to make this one, which is outside warp, the child of this. And make this one the child of this. That means that when we move the parent, not this guy, that's the child, move this parent, everything moves with it. And that's good. So that we can then do our animations. And the same thing has to be done to this part. We have to make, let's look at it from top view, we need to make this one the child of this one. And we need to make this one the child of this. We need to make this the child of this. And we need to make this the child of this. And with that, when we pick the parent, which is that is not, there's the parent, then we can move it. Oh, I didn't already parent these for some reason. Right, who was the parent? Who's the adult here in this one? Is it you? Yes, it's you on this side. Therefore, you are the parent, so you're the child. So I'm going to make you the child of this. All right, and then I can grab the parent and move the parent, and everything else moves with it. And good, because now the real thing we're manipulating is this one here, not the other one. So maybe these deserve their own, they need their own name. This one should be called, this one would be called empty circle outside warp convex handle. So I know that that's the one that I'm grabbing, and that's the one, not this one here. This doesn't change the shape. It's the handle that changes the shape. That's the one that I'm going to use, right? And the same thing here. This is the one that affects it. So this one here is going to be called handle 1. And there's no point in calling it circle anymore. We know it's a circle. It's empty bottom cage. And same with this. It's the empty bottom cage. So now I have the ability to manipulate using my handles. And the same thing I should do to this one here. If this is the one that's causing the warping, then I can call this outside top cage warp convex handle. And then do the same thing for out here. Call that the outside top cage warp convex handle 2. Because those are the ones I'm going to use to make the animation work. Those are the ones that will make the animation. So in order to make the animation, it's that matter of keyframes. And we did already have it. Even though we moved it, we have those keyframes there. And all we have to do is add our other handles. And when we get to the same keyframe distance, which is 90 on that one, with this handle, when we get out, we can make a keyframe of it. And then when we get to 90, move it out in the y-axis to the same, whatever the same relative distance is, and make a keyframe. And the same thing with this, not this one, with this one. We've got to go back to 0 and make sure that it is flush, because we don't want it to be messing with it. It's not flush yet. All right, there. And then make that our keyframe. And then at 90, move it out to the bowing that you want. And make that the keyframe. Oops, make that the keyframe there. Now it does appear that this one here, I don't really like that keyframe. It's too warpose, so I'm going to bring it in a bit. It's a real mess, isn't it? And then make that the keyframe. So everything gets bowed out, but it does appear that there's some extremism going on here that, from this perspective, don't look all that good. So let's move it just back a tad so it bows, but it doesn't bow that extremely. All right. But when we look at it from, oh, and also the top on that one, that's not too good either. Got to play around with it. Yeah. Come back here to that keyframe and drag it in just so it bows out a bit. All right. And the whole thing is supposed to be moved over a little bit. There. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, it works for everything but this one here, which didn't move at all, and I guess I forgot to set the keyframe. So I need to move it out at 90. And, yeah, and bow it a bit. And then hit a keyframe. Again, a little bit harsh there. Let's set that keyframe, redo that. Yeah, so you get an idea here of how it must be bowed out. And for the up and down animation, ooh, that's not good. That's I moved that over just a bit too. To move this out a bit. There. So while that's happening, of course, we want to see this moving up and down. And so when I start my keyframe at 0, this would be unrisen, so it would be down here. And we set that keyframe there. And then as it gets up to 90, for it to rise, this would be up here, rising, and we'll set that keyframe there. Now the only problem I'm seeing now is that this cage is it's a bit inside and it shouldn't be, so that needs to move out a bit, right, like that. And that has to move out a bit too, like that. So we have this gap that we didn't want, and that's a bit problematic. It's kind of a distortion in there. And maybe we'll just have to deal with that little bit of a gap and try to let people know that we're not actually doing that. Or I can fill this in. Because I could come in here and move this. If I go into edit, I could hit Z here, go to wireframe, and then Oh no, didn't mean to do that. Take the bounding box, which is B, and select all these. Although it didn't quite work, did it? Why is that? Oh, because it doesn't have an edge? No, it has an edge over there. I just didn't line it up right. Select. I need to go to a view that is completely aligned, and then set up so that I grab these, and then, and I maybe can go into the solid, and I can't see it, but the solid's got to be in the wireframe to see it. I can then go to extrude in Y and bring it out that way to make it a little longer, and then tab out of that, and I should now have a solid that looks, yeah, it looks joined, except these are a bit thin over there, and maybe I can still move these out a bit. Yes. All right, that's better. Not completely perfect, but this side here is still a bit outside. So all of our tweaking a little better. All right, so now when we play the animation, it bows up to show that it needs to be bowed up. I don't like, however, that the top is so low. So this keyframe, I'm going to lift it up a little bit higher, all the way to the top like that, and reset the keyframe. And now, boom. All right, so then we have to pick our camera, and the last thing we're going to do for this tutorial is we are going to set this as a camera by pressing Control-Alt-0. There's the camera, and we can move this camera by clicking on the center, is it the center mouse button? Isn't it? No, it's not the center mouse button. It's not a right click, it is a G and then center button. Yeah, G and then center. Press the middle mouse button down. And that gives us something to start with. And when we look at it to render, let's see what an image would look like of that frame. Okay, that's fair enough. And now we can render the whole animation like so. And watch this do frame 1, frame 5, frame 6, frame 7, frame 8. You can see it rising. Now I hope I think so, I still set the animation right. If you look at your, where is it? Is it the camera? No. I always forget where this one works. Oh, the printer, that little printer. What's it doing? It's making an FFmpeg video in RGB color, and it's going to this folder here. So it's 98% done. Should be done real soon. You can see, boom, it did it. But I made it do it to 180, and I shouldn't have. I should have made the ending. Maybe I can cheat a little bit. There, let it end there. Boom, end. No, it still wants to do it all the way to 115 or 180 or whatever I had it as, even though it's not moving. That was a kind of waste. That's okay. Let it do its thing. We're almost there. Can't knock that. It'll just sit there static for a while. It'll be an interesting edit. So, boom, it's done. And with that, we can go look at the animation. The animation is in tutorials in Blender Renders, and it's this one here. And this one is 180 frames, and it is Solar Cities, IBC Gas Holder, Cage Warp, and Rise 1. All right, and if we click on that, you see it warping. Not all that spectacular, but you can see we do have that warp. All right, in the animation. Cool. It's the only way you'll get the gas holder to rise, by the way. If you don't, it'll get stuck. So you've got to have it warped out. Of course, you never warp it back in. It stays permanently warped out. And it's not the gas holder that makes it warp. It's you getting inside and pulling and bending and pushing to get it there. But that'll be in the tutorial. All righty. So long for now.